Welcome to another episode of Illuminating Information, the Mindbreeze podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology, innovation, and the human experience. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Daniel Pöll, accessibility engineer at Fabasoft. Not only is Daniel a passionate advocate for accessibility in software development, but he also brings a deeply personal perspective to the topic as someone who's visually impaired. In today's episode, Daniel shares his day-to-day experiences, the challenges he faces, and how emerging technologies like artificial intelligence could transform accessibility. We'll also dive into his insights on how developers can make software more inclusive and where the biggest opportunities lie for creating a more accessible digital world. This promises to be a compelling conversation, so stay tuned. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Johnny, I'm glad to be with you.
And we're very glad to have you on today and have this conversation. So to start us off, could you tell us a little bit about your everyday life? What are some hurdles or problems that you often face in your day-to-day?
Yeah, since I can't see, of course, there are some problems that I have to face every day. For example, when I walk in public areas, on streets and so on, I have to be extra careful when I cross roads, when I have to face traffic and so on. And of course, for people who can't see, it's always a challenge to find ways, or better say new ways, walking to places I've never been before. But especially with the help of assistive computer technology for blind people, the situation has tremendously improved in the last few decades, actually, to say so. Of course, there are still some hurdles, beginning with household devices, which are most of the time not accessible. It's hard to read signs, of course. I have to ask for people for help or for additional information quite often. But yeah, with my smartphone and with other computer technologies, the barriers and hurdles are decreased from year to year, I would say. It's getting better and better dealing with my daily life and with my daily routine every day.
And so you mentioned, some computing that has helped you with things like walking and street signs and kind of your day-to-day in the kitchen. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to artificial intelligence. In your opinion, in your perspective, could artificial intelligence help you with some of the points that you had just mentioned prior?
Yeah, it's already doing that. There are many applications for visually impaired people which are using artificial intelligence in the meantime. Actually quite amazing, since the topic is quite new. Assistive technology most of the time takes some time to use those extra modern technologies, let's say so. But especially the image recognition functionalities of modern generative AIs, many people recognized quite early that they offer a great chance and a great opportunities for visually impaired people. And so many image recognition, artificial intelligence applications are already available, and they already help me in my daily life. Let's say I receive a picture on a WhatsApp group or on another social network. In earlier days, I most of the time just ignored them. Today I can start an analysis and get quite a good description of the image most of the time, so I can at least guess what's on it, let's say. Of course, it doesn't recognize, for example, my family or friends. If I receive an image from a friend, I can only suppose that the person that the AI tells me can be seen on the image is that special friend of mine. But it tells me the whole situation, the location where the photo was made and so on, and this is quite helpful. Other things that I have not tried personally yet, but that I have already seen on internet videos, for example, I have seen an OpenAI video a year ago or half a year ago, where ChatGPT was asked by a blind user to tell him when his taxi arrives, and the mobile ChatGPT told him, just hold your mobile phone's camera towards the street regularly. And then they had a conversation, and 1 or 2 minutes later, the voice model ChatGPT AI told him, your taxi is now arriving. I've seen a taxi that approaches you. It's quite fascinating, I would say.
That's really, really interesting. I appreciate those insights. The taxi story in particular, I think, is really cool. Just the fact that, you can hold your smartphone up and be able to self-serve and live your own life without any hampers or hurdles. Now, transitioning over to my next question, I think that this leads itself into the next question quite nicely. Moving towards, the software developer lens, what elements should software developers pay attention to in order to make their software more accessible?
I would say the most important part is to cope with the semantics, which means software, for example, the web browser also assistive technologies should be able to recognize what an element really is. This sounds trivial, but it is not. For example, if you create a graphical user interface, let's say for a web application, you are quite free in designing how it looks, what it does, how it interacts with, for example, keyboard, mouse, and so on. But sometimes it's hard for assistive technologies or even for the web browser to determine what is the element. For example, it could be a checkbox, it could be a menu. And giving all of the elements a good semantic is actually the most critical aspect of accessibility, I would say. Something else that's quite important, it should software that wants to be accessible should be fully operable with keyboard, not only via mouse or other touch devices, but keyboard operability improves accessibility quite a lot, because if something is operable via keyboard, then for example it's usable by visually impaired people like me. But it's also usable for people who have movement impairments, who have motoric problems, who have problems controlling their mouse, because if keyboard accessibility is implemented and supported, people can use alternative input devices. Most of the time they use the keyboard interfaces to communicate with software. Another important thing is to label graphics and to give information about videos. For example, those who have no sound and no speech coming with them. There should be information on what the video is about and so on. But the most important thing, I would say, is semantics.
Accessibility is in the specificity of the semantics, I think is a concise way to wrap that up. That was really, really insightful and super cool insight there, Daniel. Now, to close out here, my last question to close things out, can you share a specific moment from your personal perspective where you felt truly empowered by accessible technology?
Yeah, I thought about this question for a while because you gave me the questions some days before, so I could prepare a little for that interview. And I thought, what was the most empowering moment in my life regarding accessibility and assistive technology? And I must say it was in the early 90s when I got my first computer with assistive technology, with braille and speech output, and it also came with a scanner, which was quite unusual at that time because most of the people worked with MS-DOS at this time. And it also contained an optical character recognition software, which meant I could take a book, a normal book in normal writing, put it on my scanner and scan it, and then read it in braille or listen to it via speech output. And from that moment on, I had the possibility to walk into a bookshop, buy whatever book I liked or thought could interest me, and take it home with me and read it. And this sounds quite trivial again, but for me it was extraordinary, because before that time I could only rely on the braille libraries for the blind, and their book offer, of course, was quite limited. And from the time on I got the scanner and an OCR software, I could read any book that I wanted to read. And since I'm very fond of books, I was in my childhood already, this was a great empowerment moment for me. I could read any book I liked.
That's a really beautiful answer. I do have a follow-up question to that, and I will warn you, it's a little bit off script, so if we need to cut it, that's totally fine. But just out of curiosity, you mentioned that you were such a big avid reader, and I think that that's such a fantastic way to discover and really go deep into your love of reading. Do you remember when you walked into your first bookstore after being able to have this technology, do you remember some of the first books that you thought to yourself, wow, I'm really excited to finally read this? Like, were there any books that popped out to you?
I'm not sure about the title, but I suppose it was some kind of science fiction. I'm a great fan of science fiction, and I was already when I was 12 or 13. But I'm not sure which book was the first one I scanned.
Okay, well, that's super cool anyways. I think I'm also a big science fiction fan. I'm a big Star Wars guy, so I love to be a nerd out. And Daniel, I just want to say thank you so much for the insight. This conversation has been fantastic. Before we head out, are there any closing comments that you would like to leave with the listeners?
I would be glad if some of them get a better understanding for the needs of accessible software, because since I'm an accessibility engineer for myself, the more software becomes accessible, the better for me and for many other people. And if some people found it interesting what I said about accessible software and take care to make their own software a little more accessible, this would be a great outcome of that interview, I would say.
I think so too, and I do hope that people take away the need for increased accessibility in software as software continues to expand and grow at such a rapid pace.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up this insightful episode of Illuminating Information. A huge thank you again to Daniel for sharing his story and expertise on accessibility. From his personal experiences to his professional advice for developers, it's clear that accessibility is not just about meeting standards, it's about creating opportunities for everyone to engage with technologies on equal footing. If you found today's discussion inspiring, be sure to subscribe to Illuminating Information for more conversations that shine a light on the human side of technology. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes, feel free to reach out today. Stay curious, stay adaptive, and as always, keep illuminating information.